Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining today. Apologies, we are 12:02, so we're 2 minutes behind. Sincere apologies for that. We've had a bit of a technical glitch here as we got online. So maybe the internet's just as frozen and uncooperative for us as the weather is outside. So thank you for your patience in joining. Before we get going, we've got a quick little video here that we'd like to share with the group, and then we'll get back to the agenda here. Okay, very good. Well, thank you for joining today, everyone. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedules. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you're calling from coast to coast to coast here. I'm Mike McGarragan, Business Development Manager with Milestone Environmental. And this is part 2 of our webinar series on Indigenous engagement, inclusion, and capacity building. And so I'm really excited today to really wrap up where we started in webinar, our first webinar on, defining, what is engagement and why it's important. And today we're going to talk about the framework on how do you implement engagement into your organization, into your business plans and operations. So excited. We'll get around to our panelists here in a second. I'm going to close out a couple of housekeeping items for us here. So as we move through the time together, I just want everyone to know that if you have any questions, please go ahead and post them. We will do our best to read those questions out and answer them. And if we, for some reason, are unable to get to them, we'll make sure to follow up with you after the fact and get those answered for you. In addition to that, you'll see sort of to the right hand of your screen where you can sort of drop those questions, and you also see some poll questions. We'd really appreciate to hear people's feedback on those. It helps us to just better understand, where everyone's coming from today and what brought them to this webinar, and if there's any sort of follow-up that can be done to help support your own initiatives that you're working on within your own organizations. Additionally, we are going to be making a one-to-one donation for each attendee today to One Tree Planted, a not-for-profit organization who are committed to restoring forests, creating habitat for biodiversity, and making an overall positive social impact around the world. So we're extremely excited to partner with them. We've been doing that through all of our webinars, and we will continue through this one. So thanks for joining us today. So we'll take a moment here to move through, and I would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the lands on which I'm speaking on today. They constitute present-day city of Mississauga. They are part of the treaty and traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat and the Wyandot nations. We recognize these peoples and their ancestors as peoples who inhabited these lands since time immemorial. I would also like to take a moment to acknowledge that we are coast to coast today, third coast as well, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people that we each call home. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in improving relationships between the nations and to improve our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures. So I'd like to take that moment to thank them for allowing us to meet and learn together on their territory. So you're not here to hear me speak and go on. I'll do the question asking here. So we're going to roll up into introducing our panelists. So today I've got Houston Barnaby with me, Ken Letander, Corey Janvier, and Gavin Domitter. And before I pass over to each of you to sort of do your own introduction, I would like to acknowledge the fact that Jennifer Knox, CEO with Comox Economic Development Corporation, was also scheduled to join us, but unfortunately had to pass on the opportunity due to some scheduling conflicts that have come up. So we'll look to hopefully schedule up with Jennifer on another topic down the road here. Saying all that, I'm going to flip it over to Kenneth to start us off. So Kenneth, can you do an introduction of where you're calling in from today and a bit of your background, please?
Hi there. Thank you so much, Mike. I appreciate the introduction and for the warm greetings to everyone here. So my name is Ken Letander. I'm a business strategist, so I work with AtkinsRéalis, and so I really specialize in the area of risk management when it comes to Indigenous procurement and recruitment. So we're not necessarily talking about risk in a bad way, just understanding what our corporate risks are when it comes to business forecasting, planning, to make sure Indigenous businesses are included ahead of time and to ensure that they're business ready and know about opportunities. Originally, I come from Manitoba, so Treaty 2 area. I now reside in Treaty 6 area in Edmonton, Alberta. And nice to have everyone here, and nice to see Houston, Corey, Gavin, and yourself, Mike. Thank you.
That's wonderful, Kenneth, and thank you for that. Excited that you could join us today. Really looking forward to hearing your perspective. I'm gonna jump over to Corey, our last minute ad last week, who graciously accepted, and really appreciate that, Corey. And I just flip it over to you for your introduction.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm kind of in the middle of getting my crew doing a bunch of snow removal for Squamish Nation. So I'm Corey Janvier. I'm originally from Chippewa Prairie Dene First Nation, which is up in the Fort McMurray region. I own and operate a company called Cedar Brush Site Services and Janitorial, which provides 5 different service lines throughout Metro Vancouver. So Indigenous Clean Team, your commercial janitorial, site services, so junk removal, snow removal, like I'm in the middle of right now. Indigenous home care, which is quite extensive and growing rapidly. So we're doing home care services for various organizations, First Nations. We have staffing, so provide Indigenous manpower for building managers and so forth, and cleaning products, solutions, and supplies. So it's Cedar Brush. And I'm a professional visitor, so I have a little consulting company where I support Indigenous engagement, business development for companies that need support in this space that we're actually talking about today.
That's excellent. So you got a whole bunch of different hats that you're wearing, Corey, and that seems to be a trend for all of our panelists. You know, you're doing a whole bunch of different things. That's wonderful.
Yeah, excellent. No, I think we all come with our different skill sets or what we're kind of expertise in, and like Ken said, his is risk, and mine is a lot of that business development and engagement. Houston will fire away after me. So
that's right. Yeah, we'll flip it over to Houston now. Thanks, Corey.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you are in the world. Gwe, my name is Houston. I'm a Mi'kmaq from Listigouche, Quebec. I am a recovering lawyer. I promise you one of the good ones. I'm also now one of the co-founders here at Indigenous Treaty Partners. We are an Indigenous consulting firm supporting primarily the non-Indigenous market, bringing our non-Indigenous brothers and sisters to a place of confidence so that they make their own relationships and carry their own flag. But that can only be done through building that awareness first about our Indigenous cultures and our perspectives. And then, of course, that leads to other engagements and services where Indigenous Treaty Partners can support those companies looking to make deeper relationships with our communities.
Excellent. Well, Houston, you're a two-timer here. You're back to back. So kudos and thank you for doing that. And then our other two-timer, not to be put last here, certainly not least, but Gavin Domitter. Gavin, I'll flip it to you.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. Apologies. I think for those on the West Coast here, we're experiencing Snowmageddon, as you can see from Corey there. He's out dealing with snow, and Ken and Houston, you being on the East Coast, you can appreciate it. I think we're going to hit about 20 centimeters today. So anyhow, and I see there's a lot of people from across the country, so really nice to see everyone. Just quickly, I'm the manager of Indigenous Relations here at Milestone. We operate, as Mike mentioned, coast to coast to coast. I'm based out of Langley in the unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples, and particularly the Kwantlen Nation, Keetsi Nation, and the Stolo people. We have now, as of recently, 8 different partnerships in different forms, whether they be joint ventures, limited partnerships, or corporations, but 8 Indigenous partnerships across Canada forms a very large part of our business. And something that's very important to us, whether it's projects that we execute with our partners or with Milestone. So honored to be a part of this panel. Real depth of expertise representing different sides of industry, consulting, and as Corey mentioned, small business and mini small businesses. And just lastly, I'll mention this will probably come up in the during the session, but we just recently worked with Houston Industry Partners in working towards our own reconciliation action plan, and something we'll probably touch on during the session. Back to you, Mike. Thanks, everyone.
That's great. All right, Gavin, thank you. So I think it makes sense. Let's briefly go over. Last time in the first session we talked about, and I mentioned it earlier, but we talked about what is engagement, defining the importance of it. And, I myself did another relook recently of that webinar. And there's a few things that stuck out to me. And then I want to go around to everyone, just get a quick 1-minute version of your own take on, why engagement is important. So a couple of things that stood out to me, and they're quotes, but nothing for us without us, for one. Extraordinary quote. I'd love to sort of unpack that as we talk about the how today. And then establishing relationships is a long-term process that never go into it from a short-term perspective. So we'll sort of unpack that as well. And then think before you begin was another one. And it was, think about the ways you would do engagement with anyone in the sense of building a relationship, building that trust, building that capacity between one another. And then the last one I had was engage before the need is there. Don't go there with your own agenda. Go in there with an open mind, open arms, and an open perspective to really create a true relationship. So I'll stop there on those and touch on them if y'all want to. But Houston, I'm going to go to you first on this one. Give me your quick version on the importance around it before we jump into the hows.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that, Mike. Well, first, let's define engagement, right? In the context of Indigenous inclusion, engagement is not just a buzzword, it's really a meaningful process. Of course, it involves actively involving Indigenous communities in decision-making processes. And this is key because it's not just consulting these communities, but ensuring that their voices are not only heard, but also respected and considered in the outcomes. Right, because I think the missing piece and why this can kind of go a little flat sometimes is we feel that we're engaged quite a bit, but is our engagement leading to anything, right? So why is this important? Well, engagement goes beyond mere compliance or ticking off a box. It's about building bridges, building that relationship, fostering a mutual respect and understanding that forms the bedrock of any lasting relationship. So when organizations engage sincerely with Indigenous communities, and that sincerity is really important, they're not just acknowledging the community's rights and values, but also enriching their own understanding and perspectives, right? It's that two-way street. There is much to gain from meaningfully engaging with our Indigenous brothers and sisters.
Yeah, okay. Excellent, Houston, and you touch on really great notes there, and I look forward to us really expanding that now into the house. So Kenneth, I'll flip over to you for your comment on this.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. And Houston, absolutely, you're right. It's a two-way street. So I've worked in the First Nation sector, so working with chief and council, worked in disaster recovery situations for not-for-profits, so NGOs, for government, and in the private sector. And it really comes down to relationships with community. When you work within community, relationships working with elders, parents, youth, and private sector, government also. And having that relationship to really fall back on to make sure that you're looking at things from different perspectives, right? How does government look at the situation? How does community feel about the situation? What are their thoughts? So when you have those relationships, you're going to have different insights. You're going to be able to notice and find trends and blind spots. But without those relationships, you're just going in there and making personal assumptions on how the process should look and what's going to be best for community. And I think when we don't have that relationship, it falls into that potential paternalism aspect of we know what's best for the situation. And that's really where the pitfall happens. So I really think in terms of for engagement, why it's important is it helps reduce personal biases. So for example, we may have heard a community has these barriers, and so we create a bias about what we're going to expect when we go there. So we're going to create the solution for them, and then we get there and realize, what we've heard or what we've learned isn't true. So getting to know that community ahead of time, and you're really getting to be embedded within the community, understanding their thoughts and what they're passionate about. From a policy side, really at the end of the day, policies can be perceived as real or they could be actual policy barriers for community. So when you have that relationship and you have that open mind, as you said there earlier, Mike, it's really going to help you understand your operational organizational policies. For example, procurement, there might be a barrier for bonding or an insurance barrier, and maybe it doesn't necessarily need to exist. I mean, I've seen some bids out there throughout the lay of the land in Canada where it was an evaluation bid for a social program, and they wanted you to have core certification and all these different documents really when it wasn't relevant for that specific bid. So those are some of the reasons why that early engagement and constant engagement is important.
Excellent, Kenneth. That's awesome, and there's a few different elements there, and I'm sure we're going to touch upon one of them. The idea of being curious and being open-minded. I know that's been part of our prep for today. We've used that terminology quite a lot, so I look forward to us expanding on that. Corey, let's get your take on this.
Yeah, I think the two guys nailed it perfect. It's the common theme that's been brought up in both of their comments is relationships, and the engagement piece of any relationship, if it's a major project, if it's a consultation for exploration, or if it's working with a nation on leasing land for a large company, the relationship piece needs to be there. And from my experience working with my nation and the industry in Fort McMurray when I was doing a lot of stuff in the oil sands, the companies that we had the best relationship with their Indigenous engagement personnel were the ones that our nation succeeded the most at with our band-owned companies, band member-owned companies, joint ventures, because the relationship wasn't just a checkbox of, okay, we went out and talked to them, showed them a PowerPoint, now let's move on with our project. Working with guys like Rory O'Connor and Alex O'Kinsick with Meg Energy, they've both moved on, but those relationships are lifetime now, right? That Rory's down working with tech, but still involved and still talks to a lot of the community members. So I think the engagement, one of the most important pieces is definitely relationships, and that's how I've built my career is relationship building and relationship management. And yeah, I think both guys they brought it, and it doesn't happen overnight. It's ongoing, and it does take a lot of work, and you're not just checking a checkbox and filling out some paperwork for a project and your community consultation or engagement. It goes beyond that. So
for sure, great, all great points there. And Gavin, to round us out quick on this.
Well, let's keep this order, because with 3 brilliant answers, I don't have much to add. But I will going in on 2 very key points. Like at the end of the day, I think if I could paraphrase or even just remind, like there's a social, moral, ethical, given the tragic history and the rest, it's just the right thing to do. But 2 phrases that jump out at me, Kenneth, you mentioned blind spots, and I'll just share a very quick example. So we can look at it from that social, cultural, ethical, moral point of view. But if you want to look at it just from purely a business lens, which I don't think is the right thing to do, but that's part of the equation, is in Coral Harbor recently, where we have a partner we're working with, an Inuit firm, a very successful Inuit contracting firm, and that's proving to be a very rewarding partnership for both parties. But in our recent site visit, it was brought up by some elders who had experience of former military operations there 40, 50, 60 years ago of a line that had not, a former fuel line that was in the area, that may have not been notified of or whatever. Point being is, it's those blind spots, right? And so there's so much history, and I think Houston mentioned on it earlier, is Indigenous peoples have, in some cases, millennia of experience since time immemorial in their areas. So there's a lot we can learn even in recent history that will help the business, help the project, help the operation. So yeah, I just wanted to add that little piece there. Thank you, Michael. Thanks, everyone.
Excellent. Okay, so we're going to jump in here, and I'm going to sort of paint a bit of a picture, and then we'll do roundtable again. So I'm a non-Indigenous business, let's say, okay? And I'm coming to the group here today, and I'm going to ask you, what are the key elements and the stages that I should be following that you would recommend I'm following when it comes to engaging with the different Indigenous communities? Sorry, can't speak. Indigenous communities. And Kenneth, I'm going to start off with you on this one.
Perfect. So not in any specific order, and just as I used to work with the Truth and Reconciliation, and people ask me, what's reconciliation? I said, there's many different paths to reconciliation. There's many different paths to get somewhere, and reconciliation's a journey, and just like it's interpretive also, depending where you're coming from, for whether you're private sector business, government, or a community NGO. So same thing with elements to engage with Indigenous communities. So, not in any specific order, but some of the things are, research, do your homework, essentially. If you're the first time you're going to meet with a community, is there any publicly available documents, or look at the community's website, learn about the culture ahead of time. Perhaps if it took you 6 months to get that meeting and you really want to show that you've done your homework, is not going there and asking them to give you a cultural awareness course about their community. That will come with the relationship, but maybe that's not where you want to start off your first meeting when you've been waiting to get 6 months for it. Essentially, if there's community facilitators, you want to do business and contract from them and their service and support the local economy. I would also say look at web-based literature, look at any other information sources. So maybe there was a community literature report about industry engagement and how they want. So again, look at that, do your homework, build out those profiles. Of course, they're going to be outdated because they maybe created 5 years ago. So maybe use those as a reference point when you are engaging with community or specific groups, even if they're urban groups. And also don't forget about urban Indigenous populations and learning from them too, because in some cases people are displaced because of floods and fires. So they made the urban centers their home. So don't forget about those folks and their voices also. I would say importantly, and I've seen this a lot happen in community and in government, is the lack of communication with your own colleagues. And so there's folks who worked on projects, flood recovery projects. So communicate with your colleagues. Can you reduce any overlap? Some organizations are big, have thousands of people, and can you find out, hey, does anyone have a relationship with XYZ community? And this is one way that you might be able to avoid further contributing to community fatigue and engagement burnout. Is just know who's there. So if Gavin's there, ask Gavin, hey, do you have anyone I can talk to, or can we go into a meeting together, and just maybe better utilize your human resources and people. One last one I would say is, look for any lessons learned. Is it maybe someone in your organization or company was real passionate and about to retire, and they spent a lot of time creating a lessons learned document or a standard operational procedure. And they really wanted to say, hey, okay, Gavin's going to take the torch when I retire. Gavin read it, understands it really well, and then no one else reads it. So again, looking at those SOPs, how can that support that sustainability piece? And also at the same time, when you do know about pre-existing documents like this, you also can keep that relationship going versus starting it every 6 months or quarter when someone moves on from a project and you're onboarding a new person. So there's some small tips.
You're right. No, that those are valuable, and I mean, so I've made a couple notes here. So, research ahead of time. You mentioned fatigue and burnout. I found that to be intriguing as well. Creating almost like creating clear lines of communication that you're going to go in with. Making sure that you're clear, concise, and really approaching it in the right manner. Houston, what about your thoughts on this?
I completely agree with what Kenneth just said. Number one is research. And that research can be done yourself with a desktop study. Maybe, a lot of these communities, they have websites. They're on Facebook. You can find out when the community feast is. It's on there. You can reach out to organizations like ours, Indigenous Treaty Partners, or other knowledge holders. Like I would consider Gavin a knowledge holder. He's been doing this work for quite some time, built really meaningful relationships. I know he's busy enough, but if you have a chance to grab a coffee with him, that wouldn't be a bad idea. So research first. Number two is now we're ready to kind of introduce ourselves, have this initial contact and build that relationship. And approaching Indigenous communities demands respect and openness. The unfortunate thing is now the Canadians of today have to respond and have in the back of their mind the legacy that Indigenous peoples and this relationship has been through, right? So we're kind of left with the bill. So how do we obviously make improvements to that relationship, but actually keep that context in the back of our mind, right? So that's why it takes this respect and openness. And the trust isn't there initially, but it can be built. And these relationships, when built, are some of the most meaningful and some of the most deep relationships, right? So we're still on stage two, this initial contact relationship stage. And this stage is really about establishing trust, showing that you're there to listen and learn, not just to impose your own agenda, right? And it's the groundwork for a relationship that's based on equality and respect. And so I guess now for those of you keeping track at home, number three, this is where the rubber hits the road in this consultation collaboration phase. This stage is where the engagement becomes more active. We have to integrate the community's needs and values into our plans and decisions. It's not just asking about opinions, it's about true collaboration. This is where the community's input makes a significant impact. And then finally, ongoing engagement and feedback. So this is not a linear process, it's a continuous loop. Like many other perspectives in Indigenous cultures and societies, it's about that circular way of life, right? Everything comes back and everything keeps going. So, with this ongoing engagement and feedback stage, this is crucial. Engagement isn't a one-off event, it's a continuous process. So it involves regularly revisiting and reassessing our approach, staying in touch with the community, and being receptive to feedback. Again, this really ensures that we have this deep engagement that remains relevant, respectful, and effective. So that's a bit about the 4-stage process that we like to use here at Indigenous Treaty Partners.
Okay, excellent. No, that's there's a lot there that you've added to our list of to-dos for folks here, but they're all important. So that's great for you to share those. Corey, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, again, great. It's nice to follow up and listen to both Houston and Ken's thoughts on these topics. And I think it definitely is almost in that phased approach when you're looking at engagement. It's almost project management, right? You're doing your research, and with one organization I worked at, every community that we were involved with, we had almost a community profile which had their leadership, who they were, how long they were in power, what businesses they had, kind of more the cultural stuff, their community events. It was a pretty detailed list. And that just helps as you add team members to your project. Or like the guy said, Gavin reaches out to me here and there just on some community stuff. I'll chat with Gavin, and it's really sharing our resources, right, to help us better the work that we do with Indigenous communities. Secondly, when you're getting into the community and dealing with the people, I think it's important not just to deal with the leadership and the joint ventures and the partner companies. You might be at a community event and the person you're talking to might have a catering company. So really take into account all the individuals that you meet with, get to know them, get to know what they do, in the community, what their businesses are, and that's I have another kind of a side hustle. I have a Indigenous playscapes company, so working with communities, building playgrounds, spray parks, daycares, like the interior, exterior. And it's not just working with the Head Start manager or working with the playground committee. It's really encompassing the whole community in my engagement, right? Working with the elders, what would they like to see? What would they like to see for language pieces? Working with the youth, what would they like to see in the shapes and colors and designs and animals? And well, yeah, and then working with the leadership to say, hey, okay, who are your stakeholders that we can reach out to help fund this? So really encompass the whole community in engagement. And it could be as simple as just talking to people at a community event, right? Don't always hang around the leadership and the group of companies. Try to go beyond that and get to know each family, each individual. Again, it's not going to happen overnight, like we said in the previous, but it does take time, and this is the part of the relationship and engagement that does take time. And then same with the project management aspect or kind of layout. You want to follow up with your colleagues, how that went, what could you do better, what can you improve on, what was good. And again, that's the learning outcomes, and make sure that's documented. Because again, each community relationship will be different, but some things might come up that will be similar, and being well prepared for it and managing those risks, like Ken said earlier, is very important. And you can manage the risk in a relationship as you do in a project. So.
Okay. You mentioned about follow-up as a critical part too. After there's been engagement. I find that to be an interesting element to bring up as well. Gavin, to round out the panelists on this question, and then I do have a bit of a follow-up to this that, maybe I'll throw in the air and one of you can grab. But Gavin, what are your thoughts before we do that? Oh, let's get you off mute here.
It's about 3-4 years in, still haven't figured out the whole mute thing. As those of you that know Corey, I'm sure some of the participants do, Corey, you're a serial entrepreneur and you always amaze me. It's just businesses after businesses, but it's a very much an Indigenous way of looking at the world, not entrepreneurialism. Just to round this out, I think I'm listening to everyone. What do I have to add? Maybe nothing, but to summarize it a bit, I sort of take it as two, like a formal and an informal approach. And Corey, you mentioned that template you used to use, and that kind of resonated with me, because we do the same thing. We build a community profile, and to both Ken and Houston's points, pulling in information sources from all over the web and the rest. That's the first start. And I think there's an element of respect in that, because you want to get to know the businesses that you're working with. But it also helps, if we're talking about mutual collaboration, and from a business perspective, it also helps you to sort of formalize in your mind is, what are some potential things we can work on together here? Because at the end of the day, if it makes sense and if we can work well together, it's going to benefit both parties. So that's sort of that formal exercise and exploration and that curiosity, that word I love that Houston always uses. And then there's that informal side that everyone spoke about, is reaching out to those networks, going to the communities, going to the rest. The only thing I'll add to that is a forum like this, but maybe not a webinar, but even just like an industry forum. And I know they exist out there, but maybe this is something we do within environmental services, where we get together as an organization, and I think both to Ken and Houston and Corey's point, lessons learned, not only our own internal lessons learned, I know Ken talked about that within the organization, which is critical, but then externally, how do we share those lessons learned, both in forums like this, but associations, different ways of collaboration and brainstorming. That's kind of all I have to add. Thank you.
Well, that's good. So my question to this is, say, we start off that question saying, hey, I'm a non-Indigenous business, I'm looking to do engagement. But one of the things that was talked about a couple times here was employment. It was sort of touched on the periphery. What if I'm looking to bring in employment from the local communities? Who would I go inward to the communities to speak to about that? So that's a question that I said I'd throw out there, and anyone can grab at any point. Kenneth, let's go with you.
I'll jump in there. I do support recruitment for across Canada for the company. So some of the things, and not to say I'm the subject matter expert on that by any means, I'm learning every day in Houston, and Corey and Gavin, you folks are on the ground and you're talking. So from, I guess, a high level, I would say, there's different organizations. So of course, colleges, universities for your new grads, looking at that as a feasible option for employment. But really, again, you have to get out there and build relationships with the different institutions so they know you, right? Like your business is a product. And if you're not doing that product brand education, people aren't going to know you. And so there's different ways through through scholarships, through being at community events, being there, having a presence. Gavin is out there doing that. Also looking at community and asking community, what is it that you want for employment? Maybe it's not employment. Maybe their members have high employment and they are busy. So that's not necessarily an option for you to tap into that local talent pool. But what are the other opportunities? So across Canada, there's Indigenous skill employment training strategy holders. So ISET organizations. That might be one. You have to also look and be creative a little bit on your job descriptions. Is it even speaking, right? And when we talk about that, we talk about mass marketing, right? Like, well, we create an Indigenous inclusion statement. That's going to, all Indigenous people are going to flood to that job description. No, there's a lot of people who've done that within their job description. So really looking and asking yourself, is this job description realistic? Is it even something that's attainable? Even you can ask yourself, would I apply for that job? And does that job even sound intimidating for me? Mike, you have the experience, and I'm sure I've looked at job descriptions and I know I have the experience, but I'm like, it even sounds a bit intimidating for me to want to apply for. And so again, I remember I was in one situation in a former sector, and I was listening to someone give a reference for someone, and they said, yeah, everyone's an advisor, a policy advisor. And they're like, but that's not what anyone does, but we just recycle the job descriptions because it's easier to get them approved. And so what happens is that someone joins into an organization because they read the scope of work for the job. They're sitting there for 2, 3, 4 weeks and saying, I'm not doing any of that. And then it turns out, maybe in 2 months, they're going to quit. And so what does that do to your organization reputation if you keep on filling the role and people keep leaving? So that can also impact your brand reputation when you have people coming and leaving, especially folks that, have a good following on social media. People will start saying, hey, why are people leaving? And it's unfortunately going to hurt your reputation. So really revisiting some of those job descriptions and being as clear as possible.
Okay, great. Thanks for answering that, because I know this is sort of a sidebar, but I thought that it would be important for us to share for those in the audience who are looking to not only engage, but also potentially hire. So the other part of the question I'd go to here, and this one's probably a bit of a shorter one, but nonetheless, want to get your perspective. From an association standpoint that are across Canada and even to local regions, what ones can you as panelists advise organizations look into, and they can, in order for them to start their own journeys of inclusion and capacity building and engagement? And Gavin, this time I'm actually going to start with you.
Well, I have to put a sincere and heartfelt plug in here for Houston and your organization, you and Corey and the team at Indigenous Treaty Partners. I highly suggest for anyone attending this call that you check out their site. Houston can describe it much better than I. I'll turn it over to you. But for what they've done for us as an organization is come in with an educated but sort of an unbiased eye and given us an assessment. And this is part of us working towards our CCAB PAR certification in the different levels. And so they come in with that lens of, the goal being the certification, but more importantly, what does that certification represent and what's beneath that all? And so it's this process of educating through cultural awareness, through looking at all aspects of our business and what we do well, what we could do better, and what we're not doing at all. And from that, we've developed a reconciliation action plan that provides us, maybe referring to my earlier comment, some formality and structure for us to do to improve ourselves, not only as a business, but as individuals in how we work with Indigenous communities and peoples and businesses. So that would be one I recommend for private sector. I'll turn it to the others for some of the different organizations, though I will mention one thing, maybe not associations, but reaching out to Ken or Corey in their respective experience can be also a very helpful exercise. I don't need to volunteer you both, but I know you'd be more than willing to talk to people to provide those insights that you can share as well. So I'll turn it over to the others to talk about maybe some more associations.
Totally, and I would go to Houston next. I did want to start with you in order to get to Houston. So, yeah, no, Houston, please.
Well, Gavin stole all mine. I'm just kidding. Yeah, certainly at Indigenous Treaty Partners, this is something we're extremely passionate about, right? Growing up on a First Nations community, I understood the need for bringing our communities together. Not only that Indigenous communities see more prosperity, but all surrounding communities, right? I live in a very rural area, so I'm always cognizant of how can we support everyone. And that's really the approach that we bring. It's a really empathic approach. It's understanding that everyone has their hearts in the right place, and we're only trying to do better, but we don't know what we don't know. And so it starts with education. So I would recommend Indigenous Treaty Partners as an organization, but there are many other organizations and local to you. You can find them. There are others like us who work to support organizations. And if you can't find them, I would recommend staying in the CCAB loop, staying in that network, because they bring industry and they bring Indigenous organizations together. They have an Indigenous supplier list. So if you're looking for Indigenous organizations, they are there. You can find them. And those are my suggestions. Thank you.
Well, and they also host some events too, right? Like there's some pretty big events that they're hosting.
It's their 40th anniversary this year in May. It's not one I recommend missing. I hope to see you all there.
Excellent. Thanks, Houston. Kenneth.
Yeah, I would say, always, there's the big organization. So there's Canadian Council of Aboriginal Business. There's the Canadian Aboriginal Minority Supplier Council, also known as CAMC. There's a few other ones that are more local. So for example, in Alberta, there's CFAR, Circle for Aboriginal Relations. And then again, looking local, right? So if you're in Northern Alberta, there's NABA. So there's macro and then there's micro. And so always make sure, in my opinion, good to have both, because again, not everyone's going to go to this membership, or maybe people just don't even know about that as an opportunity. And so they haven't really learned. So why would you buy into something you haven't? So it's always good to shop local where and when you can.
Okay. And lastly, Corey, what is there any that come to mind for you?
Yeah, I think if you look in the Metro Vancouver region, you have Musqueam Capital Corp. They have kind of their list of band-owned businesses, band member-owned businesses, partners. And then again, Squamish with I forget how to say the name. Nishkai, yeah. So they have their group as well, which list all of their band-owned businesses and companies. So really reach out to, again, the macro and micro level. Look big CCAB and organizations like in Calgary, CFAR, Alberta. I was on the board there previously, and NABA kind of when the boom was happening in Fort McMurray, and again, being from there, I was doing business development with them, trying to get their membership list kind of going, as there's a lot more entrepreneurs and a lot more business coming into the region. So again, look to utilize those associations that are local. I think ROBA out of Lac La Biche, and every region will have it. I'm surprised Vancouver doesn't have one. And like Gavin said, I'm kind of a guy that has a lot of different things going, and I've had conversations with different Indigenous businesses and entrepreneurs. So you will see one for Vancouver for kind of the urban Indigenous population, which is Indigenous people from not just the region. And those are, I believe, are getting overlooked. For example, my company, I hire and work for the three nations here, four with Coquitlam, but definitely overlooked for a lot of these projects like the St. John's Hospital, and any of the major projects. Wood fiber, again, I do get invited to the bids, and just based on my relationship, or my relationships, but I think there definitely needs to be one here in Vancouver, so I'm looking forward to getting that going. But getting back to my point, really go big with the CCAB. They have a great process for non-Indigenous companies, the PAR process, or Indigenous companies, and then localized and really utilize those resources out there. And then for training and employment, a lot of communities might not have those opportunities available. A lot of the people that can work are working. And again, some communities have a lot of social issues as well. So they're like, I'm working with one community, they're quite small. So looking at how can you be creative to support the community aside from training and employment, what can you do to better the situation in the social, cultural, spiritual aspects of the community? So
That's a great point. What are other ways to look at it? For sure, that's great. Okay, so be cognizant of time here. We've got probably time for one more question that we'll go around to discuss here. So I'll propose a scenario here. So in the business I sort of described at the beginning, how would you recommend me to align my business objectives and operations to better align with those of the local Indigenous communities and businesses that are around to ensure that there's effective and ongoing engagement? So let me break that down a bit, because that's a pretty long question, but what would your recommendations be for me if I'm sort of setting out on my way as non-Indigenous business to really make sure that I'm being inclusive in my own journey? And so, Houston, I'm going to go to you first on this one.
Make sure I'm not muted. Yeah, that's really important. I would say three things. First, we need to identify our shared goals and values. Successful collaboration starts with finding that common ground. This involves, of course, understanding what's important for both business and community, right? Trying to find that bridge. Is it environmental sustainability? Is it economic development, cultural preservation? I think if we can find some of the easier targets that really bring us together, identifying these shared objectives is a cornerstone for any fruitful relationship. And secondly, or next, I would say that we need to have inclusive decision-making. This means integrating Indigenous perspectives into our business strategies and operations. Again, not just about consultation, not just about ticking a box. This is about co-creation. Businesses need to involve community members in planning and decision processes to ensure that their insights and concerns shape the outcome, and that there's actually a tangible outcome from all of this. And lastly, I would say benefit sharing. This one's happening more than ever. A lot of companies win projects, you name it. It's about equitable Indigenous participation and benefit sharing. So how can businesses ensure that Indigenous communities that genuinely benefit from these operations? This can be through creating employment opportunities, supporting local businesses, or some sort of revenue sharing agreement. This is key to ensure that the benefits are tangible, fair, and aligned with community values. So taking all of those together, I think, you're really going to be making huge headways in your relationships with our communities.
Okay, excellent. Thanks, Houston. Lots to sort of go with if I'm, as an attendee here today to really think about it. And so, we've each probably got about 2 or 3 minutes left to be able to speak to this. So, Corey, I'm going to jump to you for your response here on this question.
Yeah, I know Houston said again a lot of good things, and I think as you're kind of navigating the process and what to take into account is you have to be flexible and listen to what the nation wants. You don't want to go there with an MOU and say, hey, this is a project, this is what we're going to sign here, we'll send you some money. It's really, there might be other areas, so really listen to what they got to say, listen to their experiences before getting into the negotiations of whatever you're trying to achieve. So again, it's really understanding the community, their needs, what leadership wants, what community members want, what the elders want, and what their experiences were with other companies. And that will allow you to make better decisions and do better community engagement and community development is really understand the whole process. So.
Okay. Oh, great. Thanks for jumping in with that, Corey. Kenneth, what are your thoughts on this?
Again, not an exhaustive list, as I always have. Houston, I'm not a lawyer, but I'm always clear on what I commit to. So 2 things quickly would be understand your level of emotional intelligence and how you're going to use that when you're working with community. So you can pick up on things that or when things aren't going right or when things are going well, that you say the right thing, do the right thing. And even if you say the wrong thing, that you approach it and apologize in a humble manner, and people may and most likely will respect you for that. Second of all is have integrity. Be clear in what you can and you cannot do. So don't overcommit. I've seen this happen when I worked in disaster projects. People made commitments. They didn't lay out the scope of what they can do. In my line of work, I'm very clear. I do this. I don't do that. What I do is I champion and promote your business through these channels. But at the end of the day, if I can get that person a meeting, the onus is still on them to perform and to pitch their business and to do that piece to showcase their capacity. So I'm always clear on here's what I'm going to do for you. And if it doesn't work out the way that you would like to, I also want to be as transparent as I'm just part of the cog in the wheel. So.
Okay. And Gavin.
Yeah, just quickly, I think what everyone's saying, how do I add to that? I probably can't, but really, to me, it's points of intersection. So it's looking at understanding, like we talked earlier in the call, is taking that time to research, to understand the community, to understand the business, and at the same time being honest with ourselves. What are we as a business, as individuals, and where are those points of intersection? We have to be mindful that, especially in today's climate, Indigenous communities are pulled in so many different directions. So we do not want to be unnecessarily taking their time. Having said that, we don't want to rush the process. But I guess what it is going in with an informed eye and looking for those points of intersection. And Ken, you made a comment there, and we all kind of smiled, and that reminded me how important just humor and lightness is important as well. Let's try and not take ourselves too seriously. That's not to say let's be very professional and all the rest. But one thing I love among many things and admire about Indigenous communities and peoples is that humility, that honesty, and that humor, if you want to call it the 3 H's. And I think, going with that, coupled with the curiosity, and hopefully you can reap some good benefits for both.
Okay, excellent. So I've been checking out the chat here, and it doesn't look like there's been sort of any questions here. So we'll take a few more of the minutes that are available. But I'll go around the group here and ask you each to share, what's the one takeaway that you want the audience to go away from this webinar with today? And so, Corey, I'll start with you on this one.
Yeah, I think I'll just throw one extra one in there. Is really utilize. I guess it's what I've done my whole career and what has allowed me to do what I do, and it's utilizing my network and expanding it every day, right? Make sure I'm utilizing my connections on LinkedIn, my connections in community, and expanding my connections on LinkedIn and reaching out to them, not for a specific project, but to say, hey, this is what I offer. If you ever need anything, feel free, or if you have any questions. So it's really utilize your network out there to help your process and engagement with communities. Yeah, and I think everybody on the call, I think it's important that we reach out to each other at least once in the next week, just to start the relationships there, and take the time to get to know the individuals that you're dealing with within the community. And yeah, I'm a strong relationships builder, so I think that's one big takeaway for me, for everybody. So
awesome. Well, thank you, Corey. A question has come through, so I'm going to pause on that one. Question is, and I'll throw it out there for anyone to grab here. Some First Nation communities overlap in territories. How should that be approached, rather? Yeah, Houston, please.
Great question, and one that is should be very seriously contemplated. I would ask the community that you're in conversations with. Let's say if you already have a relationship with one of them, I would ask them, how do they engage with their neighbors? Because even here in Nova Scotia, it's just the Mi'kmaq people. I'm calling you from Halifax or Chibouctouc. I'm still in Mi'kmaq territory. Thank the creator for that. But even though it's one nation, there are 13 communities. And so, it's not just about talking to one community. You got to talk to all of us. But then you ask us, how do I do that, right? We don't really expect everyone to show up on the first day with all the answers. In fact, again, it's about listening and being mindful that there are answers that we have and we want to share. So I would be kind of slow in the process, check in with the communities, ask them how this relationship works, because that's their neighbor, and how they share those resources together.
Okay, great. Thanks for that, Houston. That's a great response, and that was a great question too for us to have here. Okay, so I'll circle back quickly on my final question, Houston. I go back to you, so we round it out. But what's the one takeaway that you want everyone to walk away with today?
Okay, folks. For the first time in human history, maybe not the first time, the second time. The first time, I think, was at the very beginning, when there was a lot of cooperation. But now we're beginning to increase our cooperation between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples. What my one takeaway that I would like to highlight for other peoples is that please do not see us as a formidable hurdle to your project. We don't want to cancel projects. We don't want to be a burden to projects. We want to be meaningful participants in a project. If the project makes sense and we don't have to do away with our relationship to our Mother Earth. Of course, that's the most important relationship. But if the project makes sense, understand that it's likely we're going to be willing participants, and not to see us as a hurdle, but as a partner. That's important.
Okay, excellent things for us to think about here, Houston. Kenneth, your turn.
Talk to us. We're human beings just like you. We want a relationship. We want to be part of the conversations around creating risks, creating KPIs, creating opportunities for folks in our network for across Canada. So it's not thing you don't need to have the perfect engagement plan, but you need to start talking, and that's just what it comes down to, having good human relationships.
Excellent. That's so valuable in life as a whole. Gavin, closing out with you from a questions perspective.
Yeah, maybe I'll just go back to those 3 H's. Go in, well, and I'll throw in an I. Try and go in as informed as you can, reasonably informed. Go in with humility, that honesty, and that sense of humor. And to steal again from Houston, I just love it. The first time you said it, when I got to know you, that whole aspect of just curiosity, genuine curiosity. And on that, I just want to thank you, Houston, Ken, and Corey, just not only for the webinar. I know Mike will wrap up with a thank you, but just getting to know you as individuals and as Indigenous peoples, and the guidance, the insight that you've provided me and us here. We really appreciate it and respect you all for similar and different ways. Ken, representing a large organization and all the history you have and experience. Houston, as a former lawyer in recovery, as I think you said at the beginning there, a very intelligent person that brings a lot to the table, and it just lands on the consulting side. And again, Corey, you as that serial entrepreneur, I always just admire your constant view of the world and what can you do differently and your networking and everything you do. So I hope that everyone that attended got as much as I did out of this. And sorry, Mike, I didn't mean to wrap it up here. I just important comments for me, I think, to make for the panelists that have joined us, and really appreciate and respect them all.
Absolutely, Gavin, and I would echo everything you just said there, and really thank every one of the panelists each for and sincere deep thank you for your time and really sharing your thoughts and wisdom here. And it's been a pleasure in working with you, and I look forward to our next adventures together in sharing thoughts. So I'll close it out by just saying thank you to all our attendees today. Apologies for the IT glitch at the beginning of the show here, and hopefully you had a chance to post your poll answers, and we'll be taking a look at that and following up with feedback. So everyone, thank you so much for your time today, and stay safe, and we'll see you all soon. Take care.
Yeah.
Thank you.